Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm your narrator, Davis. Tonight, I've got 3 disturbing true skinwalker and cryptid horror stories, all based on real accounts. I think you're really going to enjoy these. If you do, make sure to drop a like on the video and let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing that. And make sure you hit that subscribe button. Alright, get comfortable. Turn the lights down, and let's get into tonight's stories. My name is Daniel. I've been driving long-haul trucks across the United States for almost 11 years now. I'm based out of Oklahoma, but my routes take me all over the Southwest. Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, sometimes Nevada. If you drive long enough in those states, you get used to the empty roads and the long stretches of desert where you might not see another car for an hour. Most drivers eventually have a strange story about something they saw at night. Usually it turns out to be an animal, or your mind playing tricks on you after driving too long. I always thought that was the case too, until something happened to me in northern Arizona about 3 years ago. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer full of produce from California to Albuquerque. The route I took that night was pretty standard. Interstate driving for most of it, then a few state highways toward the end. I had already been on the road about 8 hours when I crossed into Arizona. It was late, somewhere around 1:30 in the morning. The highway was almost completely empty, just the way truckers like it. No traffic, no construction delays, nothing but long straight pavement and desert on both sides. I remember I had the radio playing quietly and the cruise control set a little under 70. Everything was normal. The problem started when I missed my exit. It happens sometimes. You get distracted for a moment and suddenly the sign is behind you. The GPS told me the next place I could turn around would be about 20 miles ahead. That meant adding almost 40 miles to the trip if I stayed on the interstate. So I pulled into a small gravel turnout to check the map on my phone. I noticed a thin road branching off the highway that eventually reconnected with the route I needed. It looked like a shortcut, probably a rural road. Truck drivers take those all the time. I figure I'd save some time and take it. The moment I turned off the interstate, I could tell the road wasn't used much. The pavement was cracked and uneven. There were no lights anywhere, just darkness and desert stretching out forever. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. I drove slowly because the road was narrow. My headlights lit up maybe 100 feet ahead of the truck. Beyond that was complete darkness. Then I noticed something moving along the side of the road. At first I assumed it was a coyote. They're everywhere out there. But after a few seconds, I realized it was keeping pace with my truck. That's unusual. A truck moving even 50 miles per hour is hard for most animals to keep up with. I glanced over again and caught a better look in the side mirror. It looked like a large dog or maybe a wolf running beside the truck, about 20 yards off the road. The thing that struck me immediately was how steady its pace was. No sign of it slowing down or falling behind. I remember thinking maybe it had just joined the road for a moment and would disappear back into the desert. But it didn't. It stayed there for almost a mile. Eventually I slowed down a little because the road started curving. When I dropped to about 40 miles per hour, the animal moved closer. Now it was running just off the shoulder of the road. The headlights lit up clearly. It looked like a coyote at first glance, but it was much bigger than any coyote I had ever seen. The body was long and thin. The fur looked patchy in places. But what really made me uneasy was the way it ran. It didn't move like a normal animal. The legs stretched too far when it ran, almost like they were longer than they should be. I remember staring at it through the passenger window for a few seconds. Then it suddenly disappeared. Not gradually, just gone. Like it had dropped into the ground. I actually leaned forward in my seat trying to see where it went. There was nothing there. No bushes big enough to hide in. No hills. Just flat desert. I kept driving. At that point, I told myself it probably ran off in the darkness, and I just lost sight of it. But about 5 minutes later, I saw it again. This time it appeared ahead of me. It ran across the road about 50 yards in front of the truck. I slowed down immediately because hitting an animal that size could damage the truck. When my headlights hit it fully, it stopped in the middle of the road. I got a clear look at it. That's when I realized something was wrong. The body looked like a large coyote, maybe even a wolf, but the legs were too long, the back legs especially, and it was standing completely still, staring directly at the truck. Animals normally run when a truck approaches. This one didn't move. Then it did something I still have trouble explaining. It stood up, not fully upright like a person, but high enough that the front legs lifted off the ground for a moment, almost like it was balancing on its back legs. I slammed the brakes because I thought it might jump toward the truck, but the moment the truck slowed down, it dropped back down and ran off the road into the darkness. I sat there for a moment trying to process what I had just seen. Eventually, I started driving again. The road kept going for another 15 minutes before it connected to a highway. I thought that was the end of it, but about halfway down that stretch, I saw something in my mirrors again. At first, I thought it was another vehicle behind me. Then I realized there were no headlights, just movement, something running behind the truck. I looked carefully through the side mirror. It was the same animal, running directly behind my trailer, and it was keeping up with the truck easily. At that point, I felt genuinely nervous, because I was going almost 60 miles per hour. No animal should be able to run that fast for that long. I sped up to about 70. The thing kept pace for several miles. Eventually, the road connected to a small highway that ran through a tiny town, maybe a gas station, a diner, and a few houses. As soon as I reached the first streetlight, the animal disappeared again. I didn't see it after that. I stopped at the gas station to calm down for a minute and grab coffee. There was an older man behind the counter, probably in his 60s. He noticed I looked shaken and asked if I was all right. I told him I had just driven down the desert road from the interstate and saw a strange animal running beside my truck. I described what it looked like. He listened quietly the whole time. Then he asked me one question. He said, "Did it try to make you stop?" That question made me uncomfortable. I asked him what he meant. He told me truck drivers sometimes report something running beside their vehicles out on those roads, usually late at night. He said people around the area don't like to talk about it much. Then he said something else that stuck with me. He said if it ever happens again, don't stop the vehicle. Just keep driving until you reach a town or highway. I asked him what it was supposed to be. He shrugged and said he didn't know. But people around the reservation sometimes call it a skinwalker. At that point, I honestly thought he might just be messing with me. But the way he said it didn't sound like a joke. I finished my coffee and got back on the road. The rest of the trip to Albuquerque was completely normal, but I never took that shortcut again. About a year later, I mentioned the story to another truck driver at a rest stop in Texas. Before I even finished describing it, he interrupted me. He said he had seen the same thing near that area, something running beside his truck that shouldn't have been able to keep up. We both just sat there for a moment realizing we had experienced something similar. I still don't know what that animal was. Maybe some kind of large coyote or wolf with unusual behavior. But I've driven millions of miles across the country, and I've never seen anything move like that before or since. And I can tell you one thing for sure. If you're ever driving through the desert at night and something starts running beside your vehicle, trying to get your attention, the smartest thing you can do is exactly what that gas station clerk told me. Don't stop. Just keep driving. Northern Arizona and areas around Navajo Nation have a long history of stories involving strange animals or figures that appear along remote roads at night. Many locals refuse to discuss the topic directly, but truck drivers and travelers occasionally report encounters with animals that move in unusual ways or keep pace with vehicles for long distances. Most explanations point toward large coyotes, wolves, or misidentified animals combined with fatigue from long drives. However, the specific behavior described in multiple reports, animals attempting to get drivers to stop, is what often leads locals to associate these sightings with Skinwalker folklore. Even today, many drivers who regularly pass through that region avoid isolated shortcut roads late at night. This happened in the summer of 2018 when I was working construction outside Farmington, New Mexico. I was 29 at the time and doing contract work for a company that handled pipeline maintenance and site preparation for oil operations in the Four Corners region. The job required us to stay out near the work sites for weeks at a time. Instead of hotels, the company set up a temporary housing area made up of about a dozen small trailers arranged in 2 rows along a gravel lot. Each trailer had 2 small bedrooms and a shared kitchen area. It wasn't comfortable, but it was close to the job. The area was remote. The nearest real town was about 40 minutes away, and once you left the highway, you were basically in open desert with scattered dirt roads and oil equipment. Most of the guys I worked with were used to it. A lot of them had been doing oil field and pipeline jobs for years. I shared a trailer with a guy named Chris Dalton. Chris was from Oklahoma and had about 15 years of experience working in oil fields and construction sites. He was the kind of guy who didn't get bothered by much. Our work schedule was long, usually 12 hours a day, sometimes more depending on the project. Because of that, most nights we went straight to sleep after dinner. Everything about the job was normal for the first couple of weeks. The first strange thing happened about halfway through the project. One night I woke up suddenly. At first I didn't know why. I thought maybe I heard something outside. Our trailer had thin walls, and the desert wind sometimes rattled things around the site. I checked my phone. It was about 2:15 in the morning. At that moment, I heard someone say my name, Kevin. It sounded like it came from outside the trailer. The voice was quiet but clear. At first, I thought it was one of the guys from another trailer needing help with something. Then I heard it again. Kevin, come out here. The voice sounded exactly like Chris. That's what confused me. Chris was supposed to be asleep in the other bedroom. I got out of bed and walked to his door. I knocked lightly and opened it. Chris was asleep, completely passed out. He had one of those loud breathing snores he always had after long work days. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of what I had heard. Then the voice came again from outside. Kevin. It was definitely Chris's voice. Same tone, same way he pronounced my name. That's when I started to feel uneasy, because there was no way he could be outside calling me. I walked quietly to the living room and looked toward the front door. The voice spoke again. Come outside for a second. Now it sounded closer to the door. I didn't open it. Instead, I looked through the small window beside the door. The outside light mounted above the trailer was on, which lit up the gravel lot in front of the trailers. There was nobody there. The gravel area was completely empty. I stood there listening for another minute. Nothing happened. Eventually, I convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing, or maybe heard someone from another trailer. I went back to bed. The next morning, I asked Chris if he had gone outside during the night. He said no. Then I told him what I heard. He didn't laugh the way I expected. Instead, he got quiet for a second. Then he asked what time it happened. When I told him it was around 2 in the morning, he shook his head slightly. He said sometimes strange animals wander around that area at night, and make noises that sound like people. That explanation didn't really make sense to me, but I didn't push it further. A few nights passed with nothing unusual. Then it happened again. This time it was about 3 in the morning. I woke up to the sound of someone knocking lightly on the trailer door. Then the voice came. "Kevin, open up." Again, it sounded exactly like Chris, but Chris was asleep in the other room. I got up slowly and walked to the living room. The knocking stopped. Then the voice spoke again, louder this time. "Kevin, come outside." I looked through the window again. No one was there, but this time something felt wrong. The voice sounded almost right, but something about it felt off. The way it spoke was slightly delayed, like someone repeating words they didn't fully understand. I walked to Chris's room and woke him up. I told him someone was outside calling my name in his voice. Chris sat up immediately. He didn't look confused. He looked serious. He told me not to open the door, no matter what. We both stood quietly in the living room for a few minutes. The voice came again. "Chris, Kevin, come outside." This time it was using both our names. Chris whispered something under his breath that I couldn't understand. Then the voice changed slightly. It tried to sound like Chris again. "Kevin, it's me. Come out here." Chris shook his head slowly and motioned for me to stay quiet. After about 5 minutes, the voice stopped. We didn't hear anything else that night. The next morning, Chris explained something to me that I had never heard before. He said that growing up near tribal land in Oklahoma, older people sometimes talked about things that could mimic human voices. He said they warned people never to answer voices, calling them outside at night if the situation didn't make sense. I asked him if he believed that was what we heard. He said he didn't know, but he had heard similar stories from workers around that area before. For the rest of the week, nothing happened. Then on the final night before our crew moved to another job site, I woke up again. This time the voice sounded different. It wasn't trying to copy Chris. It sounded like me. I heard my own voice outside the trailer, saying Chris's name. "Chris, come outside." Chris woke up immediately when he heard it. We both froze. The voice repeated it several times, always slightly wrong, like someone practicing how to say the words. Eventually the voice moved farther away from the trailer until we couldn't hear it anymore. Neither of us slept much after that. The next morning we packed up and left for the next job location in Texas. Before we drove away, Chris told me something interesting. He said that if something is trying to lure you outside by copying someone's voice, the worst thing you can do is respond. He said the safest thing is to stay inside and ignore it. I asked him where he learned that. He said older people in his hometown used to say the same thing, especially when working near Navajo land. I never heard the voice again after that, but even now, when I think about it, the part that bothers me most is how close it sounded to being human. Close enough that if I had opened the door the first night, I probably would have stepped outside without thinking twice. In parts of the American Southwest, particularly near Navajo Nation and the Four Corners region, there are many stories involving entities that mimic human voices. These stories are commonly connected to Skinwalker folklore, although locals rarely discuss the topic openly with outsiders. Reports from ranchers, oil field workers, and construction crews occasionally describe hearing voices calling their names at night from outside homes, trailers, or camps. The voices often sound like friends or co-workers, but behave in unnatural ways, such as repeating phrases or speaking at unusual hours. Because of these long-standing stories, some workers in remote desert camps have an informal rule. If someone calls your name outside late at night, but you cannot clearly see them, you do not respond and you do not go outside to investigate. While skeptics attribute these incidents to animals, wind, or sleep disturbances, the number of similar accounts from isolated areas continues to fuel the legend. In 2019, I worked as a seasonal forest ranger in southern Utah. It was my second year doing seasonal work for the Forest Service, and that summer I was assigned to a small ranger station near the edge of a large national forest about an hour outside of town called Escalante. The ranger station was not the kind people imagine when they think about national parks with visitor centers and tourists. It was just a small fenced property with a maintenance shed, a radio tower, and a single building that served as an office and living quarters. During the summer months, one ranger usually stayed there full-time to monitor trails, check for fire risks, and respond to emergencies in that section of the forest. That year it was me. The nearest town was about 60 miles away. There was one narrow paved road that led to the station, and after that it turned into dirt roads heading deeper into the forest. Most days were quiet. I checked hiking trails, inspected campsites, and sometimes helped lost hikers find their way back to the main trailheads. Nights were usually peaceful. I would finish paperwork, listen to the radio, and go to bed early because the days started before sunrise. The station had 3 floodlights mounted on poles that lit up the yard around the building. It also had 2 motion cameras installed by the previous ranger. They were meant to record wildlife activity near the property because deer and coyotes sometimes wandered through the area. The camera stored footage on a small computer inside the office. During the first month, everything was completely normal. Then one night I noticed something unusual. I was sitting at the desk around midnight, finishing a report, when one of the motion lights outside turned on. That wasn't unusual because animals often triggered the sensors. I looked out the window, expecting to see a deer. Instead, I saw a tall shape standing just beyond the fence line. At first, I assumed it was a person, but after staring for a few seconds, I realized something was wrong. The shape was too thin and too tall. It stood near the trees at the edge of the light, barely visible. The floodlight didn't reach far enough to fully illuminate it. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The moment I opened the door, the shape moved. It didn't run the way a person normally would. It moved quickly between the trees and disappeared deeper into the forest. I walked over to the fence and scanned the area with the flashlight, but I didn't see anything. My first thought was that maybe it was a tall hiker passing through the forest late at night. That didn't make much sense though, because the nearest hiking trail was several miles away. Still, I didn't think too much about it. The next morning I checked the motion camera footage. The camera facing the fence should have captured whatever triggered the light, but when I reviewed the footage from that time, there was nothing there. The video showed the floodlight turning on, but the area near the fence was empty. I assumed the camera just missed it somehow. Over the next few nights, things stayed quiet again. Then about a week later it happened again. This time the motion light turned on around 1:30 in the morning. I looked out the window and saw the same tall shape standing near the fence. It was positioned almost exactly where I had seen it before. This time I didn't go outside right away. I watched it through the window for about 20 seconds. It stood completely still. Then it slowly stepped backward into the darkness until it disappeared behind the trees. The next morning I checked the cameras again. Once again the footage showed the floodlight activating, and again there was nothing visible near the fence. That was when I started to feel uneasy. The cameras were positioned to cover that exact area. If something large had triggered the light, it should have appeared on the recording. I adjusted the cameras slightly to widen their field of view and waited to see if it happened again. 3 nights later it did. The floodlight switched on around midnight. This time I saw the figure clearly. It was standing about 30 feet from the fence. The body looked long and thin. The arms seemed too long compared to the rest of the body. What bothered me most was the way it moved. It didn't walk normally. It stepped sideways between the trees, like it was carefully avoiding the light. I grabbed my radio and called the nearest ranger station to ask if anyone was hiking in the area at night. They told me no permits had been issued for overnight hiking in that part of the forest. After the figure disappeared again, I waited until morning before checking the camera footage, and once again, nothing appeared in the video. That was when I decided to test something. The next night before going to bed, I walked outside and looked around the yard. Then I turned one of the cameras slightly to point toward the trees where the figure usually appeared. If it came back, the camera would be aimed directly at it. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the floodlight turned on again. I woke up immediately and looked out the window. The figure was there, standing in the same spot near the trees. I didn't go outside this time. I watched it through the glass. After about 30 seconds, it slowly turned its head toward the camera mounted on the pole. Then it stepped sideways behind a tree. A few seconds later, the floodlight turned off. I waited until sunrise before checking the footage. This time the camera did record something, but it wasn't what I expected. The video showed the floodlight turning on, then a thin shadow moving briefly between the trees. But the figure itself never fully appeared on camera. It was like it stayed just outside the visible area of the lens. After watching the clip several times, I noticed something strange. Right before the shadow moved, the figure seemed to look directly toward the camera, almost like it knew exactly where it was. That realization made me uncomfortable enough that I reported the incident to my supervisor. He drove out to the station later that week to review the footage with me. After watching it a few times, he told me something interesting. He said a ranger who worked at that station years earlier had reported seeing something similar near the same tree line. At the time, they assumed it was a tall person trespassing on the property, but no one was ever found in the area. My supervisor suggested it might be a large animal standing on its back legs, or maybe a person avoiding the cameras, but he didn't sound fully convinced by either explanation. For the rest of the summer, I occasionally saw the floodlight turn on late at night, but I never saw the figure clearly again. Sometimes I thought I caught movement between the trees, but nothing definite. When my seasonal assignment ended in September, another ranger replaced me at the station. A few months later, I spoke with him on the phone. Out of curiosity, I asked if he had noticed anything strange near the station. There was a long pause before he answered. Then he said he had seen something once near the fence late at night. Something tall standing just outside the light. He said he never got a clear look at it because it disappeared quickly. But he did mention one detail that stuck with me. He said the motion cameras never recorded it. Rangers and park workers in remote parts of the western United States occasionally report seeing unusual figures or animals near ranger stations and forest facilities at night. Because these locations are often far from towns and have little human activity after dark, any unexplained movement can feel especially unsettling. In some parts of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, local folklore includes stories about entities that avoid direct light or seem aware of surveillance equipment. While these stories are often connected to Skinwalker legends, many Forest Service employees attribute such sightings to misidentified animals, trespassers, or shadows created by moving trees. However, reports that involve figures repeatedly appearing near the same locations while avoiding camera footage are part of what keeps these stories circulating among people who work long-term in remote wilderness areas.